In September of 1980, two Catholic priests and six others broke into a nuclear warhead manufacturing facility in Pennsylvania and used hammers to damage several of the bombs. The names of the two priests were Daniel and Philip Berrigan, and they had actually already been put on the FBI Most Wanted list 10 years earlier when they went on the run from the law after using homemade napalm to destroy draft files that were going to be used in the Vietnam War. Daniel specifically did so in a way that was humiliating for the FBI and its famously evil director J. Edgar Hoover. Instead of reporting to be incarcerated, Daniel showed up at a Cornell anti-war festival. In the crowd of that festival, there were dozens of FBI agents wearing extremely obvious hippie disguises. They had been tipped off that Berrigan might be appearing there to give a speech, and he did. But right as he finished talking, the stage lights were cut, and Father Berrigan disappeared. It was later discovered that he had climbed inside of a giant papier-mâché puppet that was part of the stage decoration, and was then carried off stage right past the federal agents. In fact, the entire thing had basically been planned by Berrigan as a prank on the FBI. The title of the event was literally, "America is Hard to Find." The craziest thing about the 4 months that he spent on the run, though, was that he wasn't hiding. While the federal government was actively tearing the country apart looking for him, Daniel sat for multiple interviews with major news outlets, including the New York Times, wrote a best-selling book, recorded a documentary, and even showed up in person in front of a crowded Philadelphia church to deliver what became known as the Sermon from the Underground. Unlike his brother Daniel, Philip Berrigan was captured almost immediately. Authorities put him in prison and submitted him to a number of inhumane punishments meant to guilt Daniel into turning himself in. But instead of succumbing to this injustice, Philip went on a hunger strike and refused to give information about Daniel's whereabouts. When Daniel was finally captured, the image of him smiling as he's being arrested, giving the peace sign in handcuffs, became one of the most iconic images of the Vietnam protest era. I mean, just look at that fucking drip. The dude is a legend. You'll notice I haven't even gotten to the part where they break into a nuclear facility. That wouldn't happen until 8 years later, after both of the brothers had been released from their initial prison stints. Using the historical record, we can see that the Berrigans' actions were extremely effective in creating change. Although they were convicted for burning draft files, a couple years later, 28 activists would be acquitted for the same crime, with the members of the jury publicly applauding the defendants for their bravery. Years later, Richard Nixon would begrudgingly admit in his memoir that protests of this kind influenced his decision to end military involvement in Vietnam. To quote Father Berrigan's Sermon from the Underground, "There are 100 nonviolent means of resisting those who would inflict death as an ordinary way of life. Peace will not be won without such serious and constant, sacrificial and courageous actions."